Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am honored to stand in the House today to speak to Bill 4, Business Practices and Consumer Protection Act. This, to me, is the kind of legislation that, this is why we're here. This is why our government is here, to protect the people of British Columbia. I believe it's a long string of legislation since we've become government in 2016 that is focused on protecting residents of this province and helping to grow our economy and have a strong local economy here in BC. From the moment we came in, we stopped corporate and union donations. We did the largest middle-class tax cut in BC history with the reduction of or elimination of the MSP premiums. We're always looking out for BC residents, and this is another example of how we're doing that. So prior to this bill, the legislation that protects consumers hasn't been changed since 2004. That's been mentioned a few times by speakers here, and many have referenced 2004 and how long ago that was and how different things were back then. And one speaker said, "Oh yeah, Shrek 2 was the number one movie at that time." and I was working on Shrek 2 at that time. I was in San Francisco. I was not doing any of this. This is a whole new thing compared to 2004. So very different times. One other speaker mentioned VHS tapes. I think it was. I don't think there was VHS tapes though. I think that was before. I think that was like the 90s, maybe the DVDs, I think. But anyways, it was a long time ago. Things were different for sure, and that legislation needed to be updated. We have new technologies today, new business practices, different consumer behaviors, and a completely different marketplace in so many ways, impacting how our transactions are done, how we actually pay for things. And the population has changed significantly as well. The demographic has shifted. There's a lot more of a seniors population now than there used to be. And as we know, some of our older residents, our parents, can be vulnerable to someone knocking on the door and trying to convince them to buy something. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, well, how could that be? But like there have been instances when someone has knocked on a door. There's been lots of news reports about this, saying they're from the BC Environmental Home Service. They sound very official, and they want to inspect their furnace, make sure everything's okay. So that they let them in, they'll inspect the furnace, and after the inspection, they come out and say, well, there's some problems. Your furnace is an older system. It's not even your insurance might not be valid, and things like that. And then seniors or the homeowners are like, oh my goodness, well, what should I do? And they say, well, don't worry, we got you covered. We can get you a new furnace. And they go, well, it's too expensive. I can't do that. Well, don't worry. We got you covered. We can do a contract with you, and it's only $100 a month, and it's for 5 years, and we'll give you a new furnace, and then at the end of that term, you'll own that furnace. And it all sounds good, except none of it is true. The furnace didn't need to be replaced. And the contract, in fact, didn't provide a furnace ownership after the 5 years. And even worse than that, Madam Speaker, there are instances where in the contracts there's language like calling for security registration or notice of security interest, which basically means that they're signing a contract which puts a lien on the home for the homeowner, and sometimes this can be unknown to the homeowner until such time that they need to sell their home. And then they discover there's a lien on the home, and they say, how could there be a lien on the home? I never did anything. And then they find out, because of this contract, there's a lien on the home, and they have to pay off this contract at probably a significant cost in order to remove the lien. So this is just one example of how people are vulnerable. These are high-pressure tactics. These are things that are very troubling and can lead to a significant loss of money for our residents here in British Columbia. So recognizing some of these things have been happening, our government embarked on consultation in 2019 and then again in 2022. And there's been some criticism by the opposition that the business community was not engaged in this consultation, but in fact there was significant engagement. In fact, there was a consumer contracts discussion paper that was written and shared with stakeholders across many sectors, small business, public interest, consumer rights advocates, seniors, vulnerable group advocates, Indigenous businesses. And part of this engagement process, sector representatives were encouraged to make written submissions in response to the proposals outlined in the discussion paper. Written submissions were received from a cross-section of businesses, and the MLAs that were responsible for this consultation met with many business organizations. Some examples, the Automotive Retailers Association, BC Public Interest Advocacy Council, Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses, Consumer Council of Canada, the Council of Senior Citizens Organizations, Direct Sellers Association, Public Guardian and Trustee, Public Interest Advocacy Council of Canada, the Retail Council of Canada, Small Business Roundtable, Vehicle Sales Authority, and Small Business BC. These are just some examples of business organizations and other groups that were consulted in regards to formulating this legislation that we are looking at today. So any efforts to delay that any further, I think, are completely unwarranted. So I'm glad that that amendment didn't pass earlier. This is also another. It's not the only thing around consumer protection that our government has done. We also we prohibited ticket buying bots in, I think it was 2021. Where programs would go out there and buy a whole slew of tickets and then having essentially a monopoly on those tickets, they would sell them at highly inflated prices, and we made that illegal as well. So there's a clear history of the work that we're doing to protect consumers, and that is part of this legislation. So this legislation, what it does is a number of things. It requires businesses to provide important contract terms up front, including info about renewal, cancellation, return and refund policies. So it helps bring that transparency that is much needed. It requires it. So this is helpful for like cell phone contracts. This is helpful if you're purchasing an item online and you're not really sure if you can return that item. That's going to become required that information is presented more clearly. The legislation will also introduce notification requirements for automatic subscription renewals and restrict significant contract changes without the consumer's consent. And this is helpful for streaming services and things like that. The legislation will also prohibit contract terms that restrict participation in class action lawsuits, restrict consumer reviews, or require private arbitration for disputes. I was listening in the House earlier when members of the opposition did express concern about that particular member stated that it may not be okay that we are restricting or not allowing contracts to restrict consumer reviews, saying that, oh, that could impact businesses. I mean, the intention of consumer reviews, as we all know, is to share information with the public about their experience with that product. If one particular individual did not have a good experience, they should have every right to share that with people. Of course, if the business has many customers, there's always going to be some bad reviews, but it's the amalgamation of those reviews, the 4.7 stars or whatever it is, that tell us, something about what that business is. And imagine a contract taking away that right. This legislation would prohibit that restriction. It'll also ban direct sales, such as door-to-door sales that we mentioned earlier, of high-cost household products like the HVAC, the air conditioning, furnaces, and things like that. Prohibiting also the offering of credit as part of a direct sale, reducing the risk of predatory sales tactics. Legislation will also provide clear pathways for consumers to cancel contracts under specific conditions. And it'll give consumers the ability to use the Civil Resolution Tribunal to adjudicate disputes under the BPCPA. So these changes, Madam Speaker, will reduce the financial vulnerability of consumers and help consumers better understand the contracts they are entering into. This will help increase trust in transactions and boost consumer confidence when buying products or entering into new contracts and services. It's worthwhile mentioning some other examples, Madam Speaker, on where these things happen. It's not just the door-to-door example that I gave. It can happen in bigger companies as well. There's a story I read about some of the biggest telecom services in Canada entering into contracts with customers. And once they enter into those contracts, the customer finds out that the costs start increasing. And as most of us have experienced, when we enter into a contract for a cell phone or something like that, we know what the price is. It's very clear, and we pay that price for the term of the contract. But there's been cases where renting TV boxes, for example, the cost of it went up like the first month after the contract started, to the surprise of the consumers that were getting that new service. And imagine how difficult it must have been for anyone that had that happen to them. Like trying to call in and rectify this situation. There's been hours spent on the phone trying to understand, why is this happening? Why am I being charged extra here? And fighting for what you believe the contract said. But it was so buried in the fine print, you didn't know. So this legislation is here to try to address some of these challenges. Some people have said, if you've looked at some of these contracts, you might. Some have said that you need to be a certified professional accountant in order to understand exactly what's going on. You have to put together a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and try to figure out, like, why am I being charged this? Why am I being charged that? It can be very challenging. And for the cell phone companies, the CRTC is regulating this. The CRTC, in fact, in this example, sent a letter to the big telecommunication companies, which states that these companies should not be surprising their customers with price increases beyond the price they had originally agreed to, and reminded them that any additional charges, such as those related to equipment, must be clear. They're saying that. So this legislation will help ensure that that's what's happening. Another example, Madam Speaker, that I could give is related to Ticketmaster. In fact, there was a class action lawsuit. We mentioned earlier about the bots buying tickets, and all the Ticketmaster has always been something that we've been thinking about. We all like to be able to get tickets to go to our favorite concerts and things like that. But imagine, buying that ticket and then all of a sudden being forced to pay extra fees. And when you're in that situation where, sometimes, I don't know, I'm not a fan of Taylor Swift, but, some people might stay up, and get in line, and do whatever they can do to get those tickets. And if you're on that screen and it says that you've got a ticket, it's like winning a lottery. It's like, oh, I did it, And then when you get to the checkout, all of a sudden you could be faced with like a bunch of different fees. Examples, they call this this class action lawsuit called this drip pricing. Fees outside the regular ticket price, which were added at the end to the total price. Some of these fees, like stagehand fees or something like that. And when you're in that situation, you got these tickets, what can you do? You're kind of in a high pressure situation. You got you have a timer where you have 5 minutes to complete this transaction, and you have to do it. So you do it. You pay the fee. You have no other choice. It's not like you can go somewhere else and buy this ticket. You have to buy the ticket. So that's this class action lawsuit. They're saying affects over a million Canadians, and in fact it was ruled in August 2024. Ticketmaster agreed to pay more than $6 million to Canadian users as a result of this lawsuit. So we know that there are so many ethical and great businesses out there, and sometimes even when we're talking about these businesses, we're not saying they're unethical, but these things creep into the business practices and they have to be addressed. And this legislation, after much consultation, listening to consumers, listening to residents in British Columbia about what kind of challenges they've had, these aspects of this legislation come out of that consultation. It's much needed. It's something that will benefit British Columbians. Very proud to be able to support this legislation, and I look forward to hearing further debate. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to stand today and to speak to this. Thank you.